Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to another election prediction video. Today is September 2nd, 2024, Labor Day, and as I promised, I would be updating my prediction every 2 weeks, and so here is my second prediction video. So, looking at the RCP aggregate, little has changed since last prediction. However, Harris has gained a bit more nationally in the polls. Um, so going over to my prediction. As before, we will start with the safe states for Kamala Harris. So we will begin on the west coast of California, Oregon, Washington, Hawaii, Colorado, Illinois, New York, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, which is a change from my previous prediction, Delaware, Maryland, and the District of Columbia, as well as Vermont, and Maine's second district. I'm sorry, first district. Moving on to the safe states for Donald Trump. We have the states of Alaska, Utah, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska at large, as well as its first and third district, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Missouri, Iowa, Kentucky, Indiana, Ohio, which is another change, Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, South Carolina, and West Virginia. Moving on to the likely states for Kamala Harris. We have the state of New Mexico, and we have the state of Minnesota, and that is it for the likely states for Kamala Harris. Moving on to the likely states for Donald Trump. We have the state of Texas, and we have the state of Florida. Both of these states, as I predicted last time, are going to continue to trend Republican, and Trump will make gains in these two states, Florida being a former swing state, no longer the case. As far as the lean states for Kamala Harris, we have the state of New Hampshire, and we have the state of Maine at large. And let me add in here, Maine's second district will be a likely win for Donald Trump. Kamala Harris will also pick off the second district of Nebraska, picking off its one electoral vote. And that does it for the lean states for Kamala Harris. Now we're getting down to the true swing states of this election. And some people may argue that Virginia is not a swing state, but looking at the polls in Virginia, Kamala Harris only has a 4-point lead. And if, as I talked about in last video, the polls are as inaccurate as they were in 2016 and 2020, that does put Virginia in play. I do not particularly see Virginia going to Donald Trump this cycle. However, I think it's going to be a lot closer than people are expecting. I think Virginia may get down to below 1 point, a less than 1 point win for Kamala Harris, but I do think it's still going to stay in her column. Moving on to the state of Nevada. Nevada is a state that is currently tied in the RCP aggregate after Trump had held on to a lead for quite some time. There is a poll out of Insider Advantage that is the most latest poll that has Trump leading by 1. That being said, I do think Trump is going to pick off the state of Nevada. However, I am less confident in my former prediction of Nevada voting to the right of Arizona. I do believe that this time Arizona is going to go to Donald Trump by a greater margin than the state of Nevada. And that would be a lean margin, in my opinion. Moving up to the Rust Belt states of Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, starting with Wisconsin. If we look at Wisconsin, the last two polls have had Trump leading. Harris does still have a lead of 1.4, but if this trend continues of Trump leading in the polls, he may potentially flip the state back in his column. There is a bogus Bloomberg poll that has Harris leading by 8 points in the state of Wisconsin, which is heavily affecting the aggregate. If it weren't for that 8-point boost for Kamala Harris, it is likely that Trump would be leading in the state of Wisconsin at this point. So that's why you have to take certain polls with a grain of salt. Obviously, Kamala Harris is not leading in the state of Wisconsin by 8 points. That's just downright ridiculous. Uh, Same thing for the state of Michigan. Kamala Harris does still have a lead in Michigan, but it is narrowing up from her former lead of 2, 3, 3. She is now tied in the state, with one poll having Trump leading. That being said, I believe that Wisconsin will tilt Republican, and I believe Michigan will tilt Republican. Michigan will be closer than Wisconsin, but both states will be very narrow wins for Donald Trump at this point. As for the state of North Carolina, North Carolina is a state that Democrats have been hopeful for, but prospects are not looking good in the polls. There's a variety of polls that have come out recently that have Trump leading, and people like to argue that Kamala Harris will get the female black vote to turn out. While that might be true, Trump is just as likely to get his rural turnout in the state to counteract that turnout. And so I think at the end of the day, North Carolina will be a lean victory for Donald Trump. And so with that, there are 2 states left. We will start with the state of Georgia. Now, the state of Georgia, as I predicted last time, is likely going to be the closest state, and I think that could still be the case. I do think Trump is a little more favored in the state now than he was before, despite the series of polls coming out in favor of Kamala Harris. I do think the state of Georgia will go to Donald Trump by a tilt margin, and it's really going to come down to the black turnout in the city and suburbs of Atlanta. If Kamala Harris does manage to get her voters to turn out in the state of Georgia, she very well could flip the state. As of right now, I don't see it happening. And so already Trump has a lead of 293 electoral votes, which is more than I had him winning in the previous prediction. But we still have one state left, which is the state of Pennsylvania. And if we look at the state of Pennsylvania in the polls, Pennsylvania, we had a poll from Trafalgar, which is a Republican Insider poll, come out with Trump leading by 2 points. The previous poll by The Hill and Emerson had it tied. And then you had yet another Bloomberg poll, of course, having Harris leading by a ridiculous margin of 4, which will not happen. Really, this is another scenario where if you take this one Bloomberg poll out, it seems like Trump would actually be winning in the aggregate, which just goes to show how much one single pollster can mess up an average and truly skew the results of the polling data in a state. So, with that being said, due to Kamala Harris being unable to pick a consistent policy standpoint in regards to things such as fracking, she has switched her position on fracking, supposedly, saying she is no longer opposed to banning fracking, which is critical in the state of Pennsylvania. But I don't think that's going to be enough to reimagine the Kamala Harris campaign enough to make it palatable for Pennsylvania voters to vote for her. So I do think Trump is going to narrowly eke out a victory in the state of Pennsylvania. And so that brings us to our final results of Donald Trump winning the election with 312 electoral votes to Kamala Harris's 226. So compared to last prediction, Trump is up by a sizable margin. This would be a comfortable victory for him in the Electoral College, and he could potentially win the popular vote with these margins. However, the popular vote, I believe, is a true toss-up at this point in the election. And my next prediction will come after the first debate, and most likely the only debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. And I think after the debate, we're truly going to have a good idea of who's favored to win this election, just like we were given the insight after the first debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. It became quite evident that Donald Trump was favored to beat Joe Biden quite heavily, and ultimately the poor debate performance by Joe Biden is what led to him dropping out of the race. So could we see a similar thing happen with the Kamala Harris debate, who knows? But stay tuned for my next prediction in 2 weeks, and drop a like and subscribe if you enjoyed.